Hello and welcome to the Citrus Bites budget special this spring 2024. If you take everyone back a year, you may remember we had the budget for hard-working people, I think as it was called, going back last year. So the focus was all about how to help the economically inactive, as they were termed, I think 10 million of them, incentivize them return to the workplace and help productivity. Well, today we've built on that. And I, for anybody that watched the budget live, I have a newfound respect for the Madam Deputy Speaker, who actually, for about an hour, did an amazing job at overseeing a very, very rowdy House. And the excitement was there. This is likely to be an election year. The Tories are about 20 points behind in the polls by everything we can read. So this was going to be a magic budget where Jeremy Hunt, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer, pulled rabbits out of hats and delighted us with the most amazing news. Or maybe not. Actually, it was from quite a challenging background, as we know. What happened last year, we know that borrowing costs for the government were high, although actually borrowing overall came in slightly below forecast because the economy was not actually as negative as it had been predicted. So that was a positive, so a bit more for Jeremy Hunt to play with there. But it was very, very finely balanced in terms of what could be done. But he wanted to build on the back to work budget, wanted to continue to bring down government borrowing, but we wanted to hear those great news. We're all suffering from that, the fiscal drag. This is where personal tax thresholds have been retained for many years, bringing more people into those higher rates of income tax. So where was the good news going to be? And actually at the back of that, we were waiting to hear whether this pledge, for people that remember going back to 2022, this pledge for a 1% reduction that we're all in tax for this year. So where was that 1%? Were we going to hear that that basic rate of tax reduced by 1%? Well, for anybody that was hoping to hear that, for anybody that was hoping to hear about stamp duty, was another thing that had been talked about for a while. I'm afraid no news for you to share after this budget. But what did we hear? So where was the good news potentially? Well, for working people, for whether that be employed or self-employed, a further reduction in national insurance. So remember, this builds on the 2% reduction that was already applied at the start of the year. So from April, we're going to see another 2% reduction from 10% to 8%. What will it mean? And I hate to say this because it always ends up using averages as the way to explain it. Well, for an average salaried employee, it means a further reduction of about £450 in the national insurance contribution. And from an average self-employed perspective, it means about £350. So that's the first bit of good news. Next, we follow on with British ISA. This is something else that's been talked about. So the option to have an extra 5K where you invest in UK listed companies. So more to follow on this one, but that's an extra 5K beyond the existing limits. A property CGT, so higher rate reduced from 28 to 24%. The child benefit threshold raised to 60,000 for the highest earning parent. Now that's one that hadn't been talked about over the last few days. I think we're getting to a place now where so much of what's going to be announced in the budget already comes out in advance, but that one had been very quiet for a few days. There's changes to the non-dom tax regime, changes to holiday leks. So this is where previously there'd been tax breaks for owners with multiple properties. Fuel duty is frozen, alcohol duty is frozen. Now, all of these things actually have a further consequence for inflation, because that's where there's some potential positive news if that 2%, which the Bank of England are so keen to see happen for inflation to get back below the 2%. So the OBR forecast, they reckon that taking everything into account now, the UK will dip below that 2% for inflation over the coming months. So after alcohol duty being frozen, there's going to be a new tax on vaping. And then there's a lot of talk about the word productivity, particularly in the public sector. Keir Starmer followed on by talking about actually some of these comments were ones that had been raised many years ago with making the NHS truly digital and ways of helping the public services become a lot more productive in how they spend their time. And so that was the bit that was talked about particularly. I'd love to say there was lots more exciting news, but that was really it. So the question becomes, well, do we think that that was probably the final budget ahead of the general election? And I think the general views at the moment are probably not. We're hoping that there will be some more news later on whether that's before, just before an election is called, to enhance what was offered today. But the Chancellor's working to a very, very fine set of parameters in terms of maintaining that fiscal responsibility, as it's called. So how have the OBR reacted? So what do they say is going to happen to UK GDP, so UK growth over the coming years as a result of today's budget? Well, actually, not a whole lot changes. Their growth forecast has been upgraded slightly from when you look at the previous forecast for 5-year rolling, especially the 25 to 26 year. However, one interesting thing to look at, and I was just looking at that before we came on today, which is actually one of the things that may well be leading to that slight increase in 25-26 is actually net migration, which is now expected to be higher in 25 and 26. So actually there may be some interesting items hidden behind these numbers that have just been talked about, more of which will clearly come out over the next few days. And taxes as a percentage of GDP. So for those thinking, well, I was hoping for some more good news, and it still feels like we're working in an environment where our taxes are so high. Well, for those of you who think that, taxes as a percentage of GDP remain at about the highest level since the 1940s. So if you're feeling like taxes kind of in the current environment still remain high, there we go. That will be part of the explanation as to why you're feeling that. So look, that was all the news today. There was no rabbits pulled out of hats as far as I can tell. Obviously, there'll be plenty to read over the coming days. And as things change, as there's more news to share, we'll make sure we share it either through our usual Citrus newsletter or through our webinar that we've got next week. We'll review any items from today, and importantly, how that may influence any decisions ahead of the tax year end or for the new tax year start. Until then, thanks very much indeed. Thanks for watching, and take care. Bye for now.